B. And we'll be reading from text 25 and 26, which is... Both are there, so we can chant together the second one. Bhagavat Utama Shloke Bhati Bhir Anutama Bhakti Pravartita Ninam Apidurlabha. By your great fortune, you have established an unexcelled standard of pure devotion for the Lord. Uttama Shloka, a standard even the sages can hardly attain. So this is Uddhava speaking in the presence of the Gopis. Purport. The term Pravartita indicates that the Gopis brought to this world a standard of pure love of God that was previously unknown on the earth. Thus, Uddhava congratulates them on their unparalleled contribution to the religious life. Text 26. Dishya putrang patindehan vajanan bhavanani cha vavranita yuyam yat krishnakyam purusham param. Translation. By your great fortune, you have left your sons, husbands, bodily comforts, relatives and homes in favor of the supreme male who is known as Krishna. Purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti explains that the Gopis gave up their sense of possessiveness toward these objects. History shows that the Gopis remained in Vrindavan, living in their houses with their families. However, unlike ordinary persons, they entirely renounced the egotistical sense of possession of sons, husbands, and so on. They never tried to enjoy them, but rather gave their whole heart and mind to the Supreme Lord, as recommended in the great religious scriptures of the world. Following the example of the Gopis, we should love the Supreme Lord with all our heart, soul, and might. These are important verses in way of comparison, because in many places we have hierarchies described so that we can understand the highest goal. And here we have Bhavadat Utama Shloke, for the Lord who's glorified in sublime poetry, Bhavati Bhi, referring to the company he's in, the Gopis. Uddhava has come to Vrindavan to deliver a message from Krishna. And entering Vrindavan, he sees the part of Vrindavan that is quote-unquote normal. That is that the cows are in rut and there's vigorous activity going on everywhere in service of Krishna, churning of butter and all the normal activities in a cowherd village, as is explained in the text, which you've already read, I believe. This was a vision provided by Krishna's internal energy to Uddhava as he entered Vrindavan, to see its normal state, because it's quite shocking, or would have been quite shocking for him to see the state in which the residents were in separation from Krishna, which is that they had become quite withdrawn, and to the degree that practically they couldn't perform their normal duties, nor were they eating, they were weeping, and so forth. So that was another side of Vrindavan. But when he comes into Vrindavan in the evening time and meets Nanda and Yashoda, has discussion with Nanda Maharaj. Yashoda, throughout the whole time of separation from Krishna, was disconsolate. We find even at the meeting at Kurukshetra later that when Devaki and other associates try to communicate with her, they finally give up and say, she's somewhere else, just meditating on Krishna in separation. And in a similar way, when Uddhava comes to Vrindavan, although he has a discussion, lengthy discussion with Nanda throughout the nighttime, in the course of that, he realizes that Yashoda is so overwhelmed with emotion, thinking of Krishna constantly in separation, that she wouldn't speak to him. And then, of course, the residents of Vrindavan, in a small town, when a hot car shows up, and there was a chariot that he came on, and they all saw it parked out there, everyone starts to wonder who's there when you see a fancy car somewhere. Like, whose car is that? The Gopis had a sense that perhaps a Kura has come back again. He said, well, what does he want to do? Sacrifice our flesh now. And they resigned themselves to this, to the idea that it doesn't matter, we're already dead. He already took Krishna, what more can he take? Our flesh. We don't care about that. He already took Krishna. And then when they see Uddhava, they're quite struck with him because he's a contemporary of Krishna. They're cousins. Uddhava from Devabhaga, and Krishna from Vasudeva. And he has similar bodily features, so much so that sometimes people can't distinguish Krishna from Uddhava or Uddhava from Krishna. And when they find out that he's come there as an emissary, then they surround him rather unceremoniously, because not only are they from the village, but when there's some mention that Krishna, there's news from him, then their excitement to find out what the message is. One can imagine, if you've ever waited for a message from somebody that you care about and it doesn't show up. Have you ever had that? Keep checking your inbox. Only me? You check your inbox every 5 minutes and chant around, get back up. No, maybe it came now. They were doing that year after year, as Krishna said, I'll be back. And a few days, and a few days from a few days, they wait a few more days, and in that way it stretches on for over 100 years. And in the course of that, Uddhava had come ostensibly to assuage the Gopis' feelings of separation, but there was a deeper purpose behind it, and that was that Uddhava was so intimate with Krishna, and so much so, he was, of course, as we know, a disciple of Brihaspati, so he was an expert in logic. He's also one of the Haridasya Varyos, Hantaya Madhya Abla Haridasya Varyo. There are 3 highly distinguished devotees mentioned, Yudhishthira, and Uddhava, and Govardhan, and called Haridasya Varyo, those Vaishnavas who excel all. And so Uddhava was one of them. But there was a stage of devotion that he was not aware of. As is mentioned here, caught my attention that this is something that perhaps no one's ever seen before. As recommended in the great scriptures, the world following example. Oh, maybe it was in the first purport. The term pravartita indicates the Gopis brought to this world a standard of pure love of God that was previously unknown on earth. We get the same sense. In the Mangalacharana of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Anarpita charim chirat karuna yavatirana kala samarpayitun unatojwala rasam sapati shriyam. Anarpita charim chirat means there's a way in which Krishna considered that I've never taught this before. No one's seen this. And that's his purpose in bringing the essence of what we're hearing today. And in a similar way, Krishna was allowing Uddhava to have this experience of the superior quality of devotion, as was, as I just mentioned, and verified by the Mangalacharana, the main purpose of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was to bring out this level of devotional service. It was also intuited by Uttara. We find in the Briya Bhagavatamrita that she had listened in to the best she could to the discussion between Shukadeva and her son Parikshit. And afterwards, she had asked her son for a summary of what had happened, what had been spoken. That becomes the Briya Bhagavatamrita. And in it, she says, considering that there's a particular kind of devotee that has this sense of love for Krishna that's so intimate that they don't even consider him to be God, because that make some distance. He said there must be a place where that type of devotional service is enacted. That was her intuition, and Parikshit Maharaj then, in various ways, began to describe, as I mentioned, the hierarchy of devotional service leading up to Goloka. And as we hear it summarized in the Upadeshamrita, Karmi Vyaparito Hare Priyataya Vyaktim Yayurgyaninas Tebyo Jnana Vimukta Bhakti Parama Premaika Nishtastata Tebyasta Pashupala Pankaja Drishastabhyo Pisadadika Prishtastadvad Iyam Tadiya Sarasitam Nashaya Kakriti. Rupa Goswami is saying there is a hierarchy throughout human society, beginning with the karmis, then the jnanis, then those jnanis who then take to devotional service, then those who take to devotional service who are after prema bhakti. Then there's the residents of Vrindavan, and amongst the residents of Vrindavan, of course, Srimati Radharani is the topmost, and the Bhagavatam is pointing us in that direction. Therefore, to circle back around to my point, there's a way in which Krishna is inculcating this idea into the heart and mind of Uddhava. That's the insider's purpose, why he sent him to Vrindavan to deliver this message to the Gopis. And so he's seeing their alacrity in devotional service, and he says, by great fortune, you established an unexcelled standard of pure devotional service to the Lord, Uttama Shloka, a standard even the sages can hardly attain. And sages. So there's a way in which there are many different kinds of transcendentalists. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then taught that, and of course it's in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Atapite Deva Padambuja Doya Prasadaleshana Grihita Evahi Janati Tattvam Bhagavan Mahinno Nachanya Eko Picharam Vichinvan. In attaining the topmost level of devotional service, as is being described here, it's necessary to receive the mercy of the Lord. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when traveling, would discuss this with those who are qualified. For instance, the hierarchy of devotional service he discussed with Vyankatabhata in South India. And in a half-joking way, because Vyankatabhata from the Ramanuja Sampradaya, they worship Lakshmi Narayan. So he began just a little bit needling. And he said, so what is it? What happened? He said, you're Lakshmi ji. She wanted to enter to Vrindavan and come into the rasa dance. What about that? And she wasn't able to do that. And Vyankatabhata then said, well, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked him, what happened? He said, will you tell me? I don't know. And he gave this famous verse that Mahaprabhu quotes in various places. Nayam sukhapo bhagavan dehinam gopikas gyaninam chatmabhutanam yata bhaktimatam iha. He says that there are many different occupations in life, and then there's those who are transcendentalists. So, Nayam sukhapo bhagavan. But it's not so easy by these other methods to attain Krishna. Dehinam gopika, dehinam, definitely people who are attached to the body, they can't do it. If there's some idea that I am my body, then you haven't even started yet. Dehinam gopikasata. Jnaninam, those who depend on their intellects, they can't do it. Even Brahma, in his prayers, has mentioned Jnane parayasamurapasya namante eva jivanti san mukharitam bhakatiya vartam. Stane stita shruti gatam tanavan manogya prayaso jitta jito jasitais trilokyan. He, after coming to Vrindavan and seeing the devotion of the devotees there and realizing Krishna is the ultimate, he's the source of all the Narayans and so forth, says to everyone, to the world in his prayers, that don't try to figure it out with your mind. Rather, hear in the association of devotees from Srimad Bhagavatam and worship the sound vibration with your body, mind, words. Then, even though we are eternal servants of Krishna and subordinate to him in bhakti, this process is so powerful that Jita Jito, the unconquerable Lord, becomes conquered by the love of the devotee who sits in a class like this and hears about Krishna submissively and then develops that sense of loving devotion to the Lord, following the footsteps of the residents of Brahmani. So he says, Jnaninam Chatma Bhutanam, those Yatha Bhakti Matam Iha. Iha means even in this world, or especially in Vrindavan, from the position of following in the footsteps of Krishna and his associates, then one can enter into this type of devotional service that even Lakshmiji could not attain. So this is being highlighted here. And then in the next verse, Jishya Putram Patindehan. I'll stop in a second. We can ask questions and continue the conversation. So just think about what you want to say or ask. Again, by your great fortune, you have left your sons, husbands, bodily comforts, relatives, and homes in favor of the supreme male who is known as Krishna. So just for a second, I want to follow the path of Uddhava in the Bhagavatam a little bit, because he's the messenger here. He's the conduit through which we're coming to see the level of devotion of the residents of Vrindavan. So, as far as I can tell, the first place we encounter Uddhava in the Bhagavatam is in the 3rd canto. And this comes in the course of the story of Uddhava meeting Vidura, because Vidura has left the palace, having been insulted by Duryodhana. And it was a great excuse, because he was thinking about taking off anyway. Devotees always look for, that's it, see ya. And he took off, went on pilgrimage. He stayed incognito. Don't recommend it, but he let his hair grow out and things like that. And just stayed to himself, going to all the holy places of pilgrimage. His path intersected with Uddhava. So what was happening at that time? It was in Vrindavan when he met him. Where was Uddhava coming from? Where had he been? So we can trace that back, that when Krishna was getting ready to leave the world, he had a plan. And as we know, it was enacted step by step. But if we look, connect the dots backward, we find that Brahma and the Devas had come to Dwarka and had then said, you can wind it up. And Krishna, then in his plan from Dwarka, had met with Uddhava, who got wind of his plan that he was going to leave the world. So the first time that Uddhava meets Krishna, it's in Dwarka, because he understood that now, not the first of 2 meetings that are very consequential. Obviously, he's met him and they're intimate associates, but I mean 2 meetings that are highly consequential. One is the Uddhava Gita, that's the subject of the 11th canto, the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in that meeting, Uddhava has come to Dwarka in anticipation of Krishna's big plan that he's going to leave the world. And then, of course, we have all of that to go through. The whole dialogue is there in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, of Krishna giving his succinct instructions about all the different processes, Sankhya and Yoga. When you get to the Bhakti section, it's the shortest section. He talks about being humble, offering respects to all living beings, even to a dog, and worshiping the Lord within everyone's heart. And after he left, then Krishna had urged his associates to go to Prabhas, the holy place which everyone knows about for pilgrimage, famous, for purification, for performing religious rites. And there he had a plan. So they proceeded there to Prabhas, and the Mausalu Lila, Krishna's final closing act, takes place at Prabhas. And Krishna retires into a quiet forest. The description is there that he's in the forest and he's leaning against a young banyan tree, which Prabhupada says indicates that we're in the smallest of universes. And he's leaning back in a casual way, contemplative way, and he has his right ankle over his left knee. Anybody sitting like that now? Pretty close. But lean back a little more. And then Uddhava then had pursued him there. Of course, he's attached. He doesn't want to lose his heart and soul, his supreme friend. And he sits down there in that quiet place to take final instruction from Krishna. And at that time, Maitreya just happens to be wandering through. Prabhupada says this is an example of Agyata Sukriti coming to fruition. Just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Anybody have that experience? Like all of us? You happen to be in the right yuga. Lord Chaitanya was just here. Prabhupada is just here. We have some momentum. Right place at the right time. Maitreya came in. He sat in and listened to the last instructions that Krishna gave to Uddhava. And part of that instruction was to go to Madhurikashram. He was there, he wanted, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, to explain, he wanted Uddhava to explain the mysterious nature of Krishna's disappearance from the world. And when we read the 11th canto, it's the most, what's the right word? Somebody give me an adjective of all pastimes. The winding up of Krishna's pastimes, Prabhas, everyone fighting, killing each other.
Vexing.
Huh?
Vexing.
It's vexing. Give me two more.
Inclusive.
Inclusive.
Conclusive.
Conclusive. Huh?
Dramatic.
What did he say?
Dramatic.
Dramatic? All of the above. Vexing, dramatic, conclusive. Pastime. So from there, I said I was going to stop, but I haven't yet. So there's a way in which, after Uddhava leaves meeting Krishna, and Krishna leaves, then he meets Vidura here in Vrindavan. Vidura already knew that Krishna and his dynasty had departed. And there's a very interesting purport in this section of third canto. And that is that Vidura then asks Uddhava about the welfare of Krishna and all of his relatives. And Prabhupada says he already knew what happened, but it was vexing. He was vexed. And therefore he asked, Prabhupada said, for psychological reasons. They weren't practical. It was psychological. He wanted to process it and hear it because he was shocked. Everybody was shocked. And there's an extensive commentary there by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur about how a magician, makes things appear and then disappear, and then Krishna did all this. And he also gave opportunity for everyone to think whatever they wanted, which is the ultimate in samoham sarvabhuteshu namindveshu srinapriya. It's like, you want to be an atheist? I got shot in the foot by a hunter. And we won't even get into where the arrow came from, because then it gets convoluted. But that meeting happened here in Vrindavan, and so Vidura meets Uddhava, and he wants to take shelter and accept Uddhava as his guru, which sounds like a good idea. But Uddhava has two reasons why he says that he can't do that. One is called Maryada Vitikrama, which means there was a more senior Vaishnava. Now you have to understand that Vidura was Uddhava's father's age. So that's one thing. And Maitreya was a senior sage, senior sages of the world. And so he recommended, you should hear from Maitreya. What's more, Maitreya was just there. He heard the whole thing. He was sitting a little behind Uddhava when Krishna spoke his last instruction. So you can hear from him. And the other reason was that he was on a mission, because Krishna had given him service. Part of that service was to go to Badrikashram and teach the sages there, including Narayan. How Krishna's mysterious pastimes had taken place, especially as leaving the world. And of course, we know that Uddhava carried with him the understanding of the superiority of Vrindavan Dham. And therefore, he wanted him in the world as an ambassador for the highest level of devotional service, that is, that of the residents of Vrindavan. And that's our process, to follow in the footsteps of the residents of Vrindavan through the disciplic succession, especially following under Rupa and Sanatana Goswami in a practical way in which they enacted devotional service in their lives while in this world. Now I'm really going to stop. So just a few ideas tossed out there for your consideration. If you have a reflection, which means anything that you heard so far that struck a chord and you'd like to reflect it back because you think it's worth amplifying, you could do that. Or if you have a question that's relevant, not what's Krishna's favorite food. Somebody I heard ask that the other day at a, didn't ask me, but at a program, it was like, woo. Anyway, it's butter, but go ahead. Questions, reflections? Yes, Kritu Prabhu. We'll get you a microphone, 7 seconds or less, or your money back from today's class. Hare Krishna.
In the first verse, Prabhupada says that the Gopis brought the word as standard, the love of God was previously unknown on earth. And there was no wetlands in that parallel introduced to religious life. The next Prabhupada says, at the end, that they never tried to enjoy, but to give their whole heart and mind to the Supreme Lord, as recommended in the great religious scriptures of the world. Following the example of the Gopis, we should love God with all our heart, soul, and mind. It seems to be slightly contradictory, but it isn't. Because when I read this from your heart and soul and mind, that's actually straight from the Torah. You should love your Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. It's right there. And so there was knowledge there. Then what's the difference as far as the Gopis is concerned? The difference is example. To exemplify that in practical life, that is the special contribution. It's not just words. Words are not sufficient. It's a practical example of the devotees, how they exemplify this, to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind.
For picking that up, that's a really important point. And to continue your thought, may I, or you have more you're going to say?
I have something to say. So the thing is, you see, it's amazing actually that Prabhupada uses or quotes actually things which is in the Torah. Even Jesus was asked, what is the highest goal? He said, immediately you should love your Lord with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. It's interesting, many of us Westerners, we come from Christian tradition, because that thread is there. That thread is actually there, what leads to supreme perfection.
Yes.
But it was not possible to teach it at that time, because people were not ready. It took actually in Rupa Goswami to explain how systematically to go from Shraddha all the way. The scientific way of getting there for the world was actually given by Srila Rupa Goswami in his writings in Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu. An interesting little thing in this regard is that the Gopis were Krishna, also Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya was suffering in separation. Right? He was suffering in his ecstasies, the sense of separation, the pralamba. And he was sweating blood. Now let me just give you a hint. It's interesting that the last thing Jesus said was, my Lord, why you have forsaken me? He was sweating blood. So there's something going on between him and God, which is on a very high level of separation from God.
Thank you. I'll just make a brief comment about that. That is that there is a common thread. I guess a thread is common, right? So just there's a thread that runs through the various religious traditions of the world. And there are principles that are accepted and kept as worshipable standards. A difference between the Bhagavad tradition that we're following, and many of the other religious traditions, is specificity. And that comes up in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto of the Bhagavatam when Narada meets Vyasadeva. He's given the basic principles that you find in most religious processes of the world. But then he doesn't feel satisfied and asks his guru, Narada, why don't I feel satisfied? And Narada says that Naishkarmyam apyachuta bhava varjitam nashobhate jnanam alam niranjanam kutapuna shashvara bhadram ishvare nacharpitam karma yadap karanam. That although you may have taught these principles like Naishkarmya, working without fruitive results, and even there's a sense of self-realization, a relationship with God, nashobhate jnanam alam niranjanam, it doesn't look well. It's not nashobhate. It's not very nice. And that's if it is, sorry, that was an awkward sentence. If it doesn't have a chutabhava. And so in that chapter, he's telling him you have to be very specific about who we're loving and showing exactly what it looks like. And that's the Bhagavat. That's the Srimad Bhagavatam, rather. And there's a way in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to further just demonstrate that with his life. Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's the living Bhagavatam. This is what it looks like to love God, the person. And only if we have that, the specificity. We may have all the principles in the world about love thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul and so forth. But if we don't have a clear idea, what verse am I thinking of? 5:18:12? No. I'm not thinking of 5:18. I'm thinking, Yene Ravindakshav Muktamaninas Tvayastabhavad Aruya Krishna Patantyato Nadrita Ishmarangra. If you don't have a clear idea of the person and a personal relationship and how you're going to enact that, then you don't have a place to stand. Even if you're a very religious person and you've attained liberation, you're still going to fall down. That's the verdict of the Gaudiya Siddhanta. Okay, a couple more. I had Prabhu. 8 minutes left.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for a very inspiring class. Connecting some dots, if I may,
Yes.
with Guru Gauranga's inspiration. In the 25th verse, by your great fortune, you have established an unexcelled standard of pure devotion for the Lord. Can we connect that to His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada? This particular verse, because Srila Prabhupada in the spiritual sky, somewhere he is a part of the associates of Srimati Radharani. And I remember my Guru Maharaj speaking on the verse in Gopi Geet, 9th verse, Bhuri Granti Ji Bhuri Dachana. Those who go around the world preaching the message of Krishna consciousness are indeed most beautiful, the greatest donors. So I was just reflecting on that, and maybe if you can say a few words.
Yes, definitely. But Prabhupada perfectly exemplified, after all, without going into the whole history in the last 6 minutes. He extended himself to the most fallen and gave the highest principle. That's noted in many places, that here's the highest thing, and who you're giving it to. That's when I said earlier, we're in the right place at the right time. It's noted also by Karabhajana Muni when he says, Kalim Sabhaja Yantyarya Guna Gyasa Bhagina Yatra Sankirtanenaiva Sarva Spartopi Lobhite. At the right time, Kali Yuga is worshipable because you get the highest thing only just by doing Sankirtan. And that's what Prabhupada brought in a perfectly tuned process, just for the people of Kali Yuga. Who else could have tuned it as perfectly? So yes, I think that's safe to say, because look at Prabhupada insisted that the Chaitanya Charitamrita come out to the world. Who else does that? accelerated everything to make sure that 10th canto pastimes got distributed to the world. Krishna book saved the Hare Krishna movement. If you don't know that, the history of that, you can read about it in my book, Our Family Business, 1999, right after class, belongs to the BBT. But there's a way in which he wanted to make sure that the specificity of the spiritual world and the process was available to everyone. So yes. Okay, Hare Krishna. Yes, Gopal Champu? 4 minutes.
I was just appreciating this point of how Srila Prabhupada brought us, gave us access to Vrindavan. On my way here from Delhi, the cab driver, he asked me where I was from. I said New York. And he looked at me with a startled look. And I asked him how many times he had been to Vrindavan. He said it was his second time. So I was just thinking, he looked at me with such a bewildered look, like, why are you coming all the way from New York to come to Vrindavan? But then I was appreciating how, because of Srila Prabhupada, because of his mercy.
Yeah, it's when we stop to think about it, it's miraculous. Last chance. Yes, Deva Madhava Prabhu.
Thank you for the wonderful katha.
Thanks for being here. Good to see you.
Prabhupada's mercy.
Hare Krishna.
You've given us this mantra, I've heard you say many times, I try and keep it with me. I live to be corrected. And I see in Uddhava's situation, he's entering into Vrindavan with a kind of purpose. He thinks he's there to give something. And that's a bit of a pretense on his part. And he comes around to recognizing that there's actually something I need to receive here. And I was hoping that you could give us some encouragement how to keep that sense of willingness to be adjusted and how to recognize when Krishna has given me a message. I've been told by God that I'm supposed to go do this, but now I'm witnessing in my experience there's something else deeper there for me, and how to be alert to that in our own devotional life.
The best way I've found is to have advanced association. If you're the smartest one in the room, you're in the wrong room. And if there's a way in which you can just serve devotees and listen to devotees who have cultivated Krishna consciousness to a degree that we notice that they're fully engaged, there are symptoms. Krishna mentions in the Gita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentions symptoms of bhava and so forth. We can look and see where can I get the best types of association. And satam prasangam mama virya samvido. And tan nama rupa charitari sikirtananu smrityo karmena rasanam manasinyo. Tishtan vraje tananuragi jananagami kalam nayeda kilam iti padesha saram. If we can follow in the footsteps of the most advanced devotees and be in their company, then there's a natural, if we're humble, we take it, then there's a natural way that we can have what you do on a Mac. It's called a airdrop. Not many of you have Macs here. You know what an airdrop is? You push a button and then it goes bing, and all of a sudden you drop your file into the other one. So you get that from the devotees. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Gaurnitai, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram, Shri Shri Radhesham, Shri Uddhava. If you so desire, please empower us to be humble in the Holy Dham, and also to take the mood of Vrindavan and distribute it to all the cab drivers and all the hapless people of the world who are just waiting for something nice, and they're not getting anything nice, nothing. So we have something nice, literatures, prasadam, holy name, nice association, being kind to people, and we can do that. Thank you for considering our request. That was all within the prayer. If you agree with the prayer in whole or in part, please unmute and say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Gaur Premanande. Vachkalpavrushcha Kripasindave Vichapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Ananta Koti Vaishnavin Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai.